First, a word from our super specialty sponsor. The Savor Brands team is a group of incredible people ready to help your coffee shine on the retail shelf. One thing I like about them is how they ask the question, where will your coffee retail, before they begin the collaborative process of creating the bag that is perfect for your coffee. Detail-oriented. They also just launched their Compost Plus plant-based industrial compostable packaging, which is to say they keep nailing innovation in their space. Visit them at savorbrands.com. So far in the story of specialty coffee, we have talked about growing coffee with a coffee producer, exporting and importing coffee with coffee exporters and a coffee importer, and now we turn up the heat with coffee roasting. See what I did there? This is not a technical conversation about roasting. If that is what you would like, listen to this episode first, then go check out our roasting series in the backlog. This conversation is a beautiful, yes, I'm using the word beautiful here, a beautiful discussion of what it means to roast coffee from the perspective of the wonderful Hara Kumaran. Hara's heart for the people before and after his current role in coffee as a roaster at Metric is heartwarming, thought-provoking, and inspiring. You're listening to the Coffee Podcast. I'm Jesse Hartman, and this is the story of specialty coffee, roasting.
So, you said you moved here in 2016 from California.
Yeah, so I moved here in 2016 from the San Francisco Bay Area. Grew up in Santa Cruz, ran around San Francisco, Oakland.
And you weren't roasting coffee?
No, wasn't in coffee at all.
Were you drinking coffee?
Drinking a lot of coffee. Had a lot of amazing friends in coffee.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Was coffee adjacent for a very long time.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
But was doing lighting for big events.
Okay, doing lighting for big events. So like, it's kind of funny, as we were setting up, I'm feeling nervous around you because you're like, you know all the things and there's a lot of things I don't know about this. But
that's what makes this rad, is that we get to learn together.
Yeah. And that's something I've really noticed even through the conversation. So like the part of the conversation that you're in is the roasting side. And we've talked so far to everyone from, the producer side. So we talked with Ben. We're going to talk with...
I love Ben, I mean.
Yeah, we're going to talk with Jose. And then we've talked to Tim.
Tim Hill.
Tim Hill, yeah.
Wonderful. I love Tim Hill.
And so roasting. And we talked about packaging with Savor Brands and the importance of getting...
Shout out Patrick.
Yeah, shout out Patrick. And then we'll talk to a barista, like somebody on the side of like serving the coffee to the customer or representing like retail side. So that's where we're at in the conversation.
Full coffee path.
Yeah, like if we're here in the roasting. And so you went from not roasting to roasting at Metric.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that's like jumping into
the deep end and getting the privilege of doing it in a pretty quick pathway.
Okay. Tell us what that was like your introduction to roasting and what it was like, because Metric was your first roasting gig.
First roasting
That's
gig.
insane.
Fresh out the gate.
That's insane.
Okay, but we have to go back to that 2007, 2008 California Bay Area.
Okay.
Was lucky enough to be friends with the folks that started Verve. Had friends that worked at Ritual in those early 2000s and saw them start when they were just little teeny local roasters.
Wow.
And was lucky enough to have conversations with their roasters on kind of a daily basis back then.
Wow.
And I've just naturally and organically, through the generosity of others, just got to hang out and hear and listen. And I have such an inquisitiveness and curiousness.
Wow.
It's like, oh, what are you doing here? What's changing there? Oh, I love this. What happened to make it like that?
Nice.
And so since that kind of 2007, 2008, have just through osmosis and really through generosity. I think it's really important that people were generous with their knowledge and time.
Wow.
For 10 years before I ever stepped foot in Metric.
That's crazy.
And folks like Jose Rivera, I started going to public cuppings here at Metric.
He was roasting.
He was doing a little bit of everything. Quality control manager, doing roasting, doing sourcing, putting coffee in bags, and hosting the public cuppings.
Oh, wow.
And through the generosity of folks like Jose Rivera, showing me how Metric cups, showing me what this defect is, showing me why, Jasmine is different than honeysuckle. And so I got this beautiful decade-plus education before I ever professionally stepped foot into a coffee shop. Folks like Benjamin Paz knew who I was from those early days with Verve.
Oh, wow.
Folks like Jose Rivera showed me how to cup. Head roasters here at Metric, like Alex Burbo, would let me bug them for hours. Now that I roast, I think it's so wild that they were so generous with letting me like be a fly on the wall, because there's so much you're doing when you're roasting, right?
Yeah.
You're paying attention to all kinds of factors, and to have someone just hanging out and asking questions through all that is really not just like, oh yeah, of course. It's like, oh, I'm actively choosing to share my space, share my time with you. And so I got that beautiful lead up before slipping in to Metric.
Wow. How does that shape the way you roast then? Like, I mean, the way that you learn, like, does it naturally make you kind of educational in the way that you operate now? Or like, how would you say you are as a roaster in the environment of Metric?
I think that having that many people contribute to my education as a roaster shapes the way that I roast. I'm on a day-to-day basis because I don't roast from my singular perspective. When I step up to the roaster, I'm thinking about Lucian's early days roasting at Verve. I'm thinking about, oh, what Jose taught me 5 years ago and 6 years ago. Oh, what Burbo taught me and how his curves looked. And rather than feeling like, oh, this is Hara stepping up to this beautiful 1961 UG doing my thing, I step up and I put my hands on the gas adjustments and I put my hands on the trier. And in my head, I have this community with me when I roast. And so I think about what would they do while I do this? And then I think about how those roasters are really shaping this and that I'm just the hands of that process.
Wow. Okay, so talk us through then the early days of you roasting for the first time. What did you feel like? I mean...
Nervous. I felt nervous. In the early days, I felt nervous.
Yeah. What were you afraid of?
In my first week of roasting, I was roasting under Colin Frew, amazing roaster, and I was really aware of how much work went into that green, how much work went into every bean. Being taught by people who are producers, having gone to Origin with the Metric crew before I ever was part of the Metric staff, I'd seen all of that production side stuff. Wow. And so even a batch size of 25 pounds, I felt a great responsibility to do that right the first time out the gates. And I felt not so nervous about like, oh, am I gonna mess this up from like a coffee drinker's point of view, but like, oh, am I gonna honor this bean that's going into this drum? Right. And steward this right.
Wow, yeah, because you knew people along the chain.
Absolutely. The first coffee I roasted, I think, was coffee from Jose.
That's crazy.
And so I knew really where it came from.
I love that your stories are coming together in the series. Ryan and I were talking last night, very late, on the subway or something. And we were saying, like, how many people that we've talked to have roasted at Metric? Like, there have been at least 3, if I'm not missing a count, that are a part of the series doing different things. And so that to me is wild, kind of crazy. But let's take a little bit of a step back and talk about what comes before you and what comes after, okay? So I'm gonna start with before. So if we talk about where you are in who put it this way? I think it was Tim, it's this idea of transferring ownership. So like, you get the green, now you own it. Like you own it in the sense of like, it's your responsibility to carry something forward. Okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that idea of transferred ownership. It's like, everybody still kind of owns it from a big picture, but like you have a moment. So that moment before you is what? Is it the trader? I just want to kind of talk through this a little bit and then talk about what's ideal from people in those positions and what kinds of challenges we see as a roaster to help our listeners understand.
Immediate before me is the truck driver delivering our coffee. Okay. And that is such an underrated, non-Instagrammable job, but it changes so much of how coffee works. So many of us specialty coffee roasters have fairly small roasteries that we can't fit all of our green in for the year. Okay. And so we'll store coffee at an off-site warehouse and then release a few bags at a time from folks like Tim Hill and have it trucked to us. A lot of ours is at Continental Terminals International in New Jersey. And that truck driver and that logistics team that is getting that coffee from New Jersey to here in Chicago can make or break my week in coffee. I'm lucky to know my truck driver pretty well. An amazing guy named Damian. We're always talking about the Polish coffee scene.
Oh, cool.
But if that's a week late, or if one piece of paperwork gets messed up, you don't have any coffee for that week. There's nothing in your drum. So having a good logistics team and a good truck driver is the immediate ownership before that.
Wow.
And you can break down the whole coffee supply chain. So it's easy to think about, oh, there's the farmer, even the picker, the exporter, the importer, the roaster. But in between each of those steps, there's probably 5 sets of hands that take ownership of that, even if it's only for a few days. But if you were to take any one of those sets of hands out, the ones that aren't glamorous, none of us that get to do something that looks cool or sounds cool, is exciting or romantic, happens.
That's a really good, sobering thing to say, because, you know, as the coffee podcast, it's like, I only want to think about the very purely coffee elements. And it's right. Yeah, we can forget about things like truck drivers who play a crucial role in getting the product to us or on time and all these other things. And so I think what it ends up highlighting, it's not like they're not in coffee per se, but they are part of the supply chain. They're hands that are touching the thing that's being handed off. And I think we can say that there is an element of just like, as we take a look backwards, or as we get a higher level view of all this stuff, we just see there's people.
There's people.
It's people. And it's people all the way down. And maintaining dignity for people through the entire chain is kind of like crucial.
It's absolutely crucial to maintain dignity through every step, and through especially those kind of invisible or silent steps. What makes good coffee is care. And in order to care, you have to have dignity. And so making sure that you give dignity to the truck driver, you give dignity to the nursery worker, you give dignity to the person doing your sample roasting at origin, makes it so they care. And to me, when I step up to a roaster each morning, I think about how wild it is that through those maybe 20-something steps, everyone cared enough to get a 90-point coffee in my cup.
Wow. Okay, so challenges we talked about a little bit with the logistics side. On the trader side, what's your role with the trader? What does that relationship look like? Let's hear some of that.
My role with our traders, or my relationship with our traders, we source directly for a lot of our lots and a lot of our coffees. But it's so crucial to have a good relationship with your exporting and importing partners, because they do all of the logistics, all of the business. They keep track of all of the moving parts. That direct sounds fun and cool, but if I'm thinking about if I want to make that actually all on the farmer's plate, if I want to make him DHL me samples and get the customs paperwork for 100 grams of coffee to me, that's so much work on the shoulders of a farmer when he could be caring for his family or caring for his farm. When I think of a trader, I think of, when is that ship coming? And who did you consolidate it with? And so like a friend, Nick from Wonder State, just walked by, and it's, maybe our coffee's going on the same container. That would be wild to ask a farmer to like, hey, figure out every customer of every one of your neighbors and figure out how to put in a 280 bag container all of our 5 bags and 10 bags together.
Like that's supply chain work. I don't mean like coffee chain. That's supply chain.
It's supply chain work. But folks like Tim Hill do the balancing of. Tim Hill knows more about African coffee than almost anyone I know.
Didn't he write a book? He helped write a book.
He literally wrote the book. Tim Hill literally wrote the book on African coffee. But he also knows everything about overseas shipping. And overseas shipping routes right now from Africa, and how the ports of Africa are, and what routes are working to get to customers in Australia and customers in Chicago. And is it different to get coffee to Chicago than it is to get it to San Francisco? And what I think is that I find special with our trading partners is that they balance that amazing knowledge of coffee, that care of coffee, with then that really technical side of how do you keep a global supply chain functioning? And it could be a life's work to do either one, but then our exporting partners and importing partners balance both in a really changing world, which is like, whoa.
Cool.
Overwhelming to think of either, but then y'all do both. Thank you.
That's cool. Something you said, and I have never worked in this area before. You talk about exporters, and so for me, it's like, do I call it an exporter or an importer? And it's a trader. All these terms can get really confusing. So for our listeners, just for the sake of learning, can we differentiate those terms from your perspective? Because you mentioned talking to them as if like they were equal in how you would operate as a roaster, and I just want to understand that more.
Yeah. So to define a few terms, exporter. An exporter is a company working at origin to connect farmers to customers, and does a lot of the sourcing and logistics for finding coffees and connecting the roasters, and then getting coffees from farm gate to the port in origin country so that it can be free on board on a shipping boat to get it wherever it's going to a consumption country.
Right. And so to be clear, farm gate is the price that a producer is paid for their coffee directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Farm gate, in this case, I mean literally.
Oh,
the
yeah.
exporter gets it from the mill
Oh, like
or the farm.
goes to the farm gate.
Yeah.
Right.
Or is at least in charge of making sure that that process
Got
goes
you,
smoothly.
got you.
But also, farm gate is then the price that gets handed
Right.
directly to the farmer.
Great.
Importer perhaps is in the consumption country, perhaps is somewhere in the world but connecting to the consumption country, and is making sure that those coffees are coming into the country where those customers are, and it's kind of that last mile connection to roasters like myself.
Right.
And does all of the import paperwork. Having done U.S. Customs paperwork, it's not fun, and it's much easier when you do it every week than when you're trying to figure it out for a single shipment. And so importers do that side of getting things into origin country. I was talking to a friend from Australia, and their import regulations are a little crazy.
Okay.
And so just knowing those facets of, it's different to import to the EU, it's different to import to the US, it's different to import to Australia. What are those regulations? How do I make sure that those domestic for us in-country logistics happen? And so exporters and importers work in tandem together. And then trader is someone who trades coffee, whether it's spot offerings, whether it's commodity coffee, whether it's direct trade but connecting to customers, and maybe it's squares and rectangles.
Yeah.
Where you might be a coffee trader while being an importer and exporter, or you may not be.
Yeah, I think that's why the terminology gets so confusing for people like me. But yeah, you just explained it. It's the idea of like there's so much overlap. And I want to spend some time about roasting now.
Let's get into roasting.
How do you maintain, like as a roaster, we can't unpack this in the minutes that we have here, but like as a philosophy of roasting, how do you maintain what you got? Or what are you adding? Or like, what's your philosophy for like, what's your role in this story of this coffee that's going to end up to a consumer down the road?
Simply put, my philosophy in roasting is care. When you remember to care, it helps you maintain your skill set. It helps you to maintain consistency of your output, and it helps you to stay on your feet. Coffee is an organic material. The coffee I roasted 6 weeks ago and the coffee I roast today are different. Even if they're the same lot of the same farmer of the same varietal, environmental conditions and change over time changes that.
Wow.
If I didn't care, I'd set a recipe when I profiled it when I got the first shipment, I'd run that profile and forget about it.
Yeah.
And then that consistency wouldn't be there for the customer.
Yeah.
That care towards the farmer wouldn't be there. But if you step to a roaster with care, you're paying attention to those variables.
Nice.
You're remembering that, consistency matters.
Yeah.
That every customer that drinks this, every coffee nerd like myself that drinks a cup of this, deserves to have the most special experience with that coffee because that's their only time touching this. I get to touch this every day. I get to drink this every day. I get to see this green and see this roast every day. But for a lot of folks, maybe they come to Metric, and it's beautiful that we have such a huge group of people that will show up from O'Hare, show up from Midway, come with their luggage before they've ever stepped foot in Chicago and make Metric their first stop. Cool. And they deserve that amazing consistency.
Yeah.
And so if you care about both the farmer, the drinker, when you step to the roaster, you're going to pay attention and keep those skills sharp. When you step to the cupping table, you're going to care about, what nuance am I actually tasting? What characteristics of varietal am I actually tasting? It keeps you active and engaged rather than kind of a passive, I'm going to go to my job, I'm going to do my job, and then I'm going to go home, and then I'm going to show up to my job and do my job.
So this isn't a roasting podcast series, otherwise we'd be asking all kinds of other roasting questions. But we're trying
to check on the roasting series.
Rain check on the roasting series, yes. I think that talking about the next part of the chain too is important, but I don't want to miss something. I want to talk about, so you roast the coffee and what happens next, but I don't want to miss anything important. In your world, what does the handoff of that ownership look like from you to what? Like what's the next space that it goes to and who's the next owner and how do we think about maintaining quality, story, stuff like that?
I'll get handed the coffee. It'll arrive at my dock, put 25 pounds into my vintage UG, roasting it. Takes about the time of baking a batch of chocolate chip cookies. 10 minutes, goes through similar stages. It's drying out at first. Green coffee smells like leaves or grass, not at all like coffee. If you smelled the white flour that you put into a batch of cookies, it smells musty and I don't want to eat that sweet thing.
I love it.
Then it goes through the Maillard stages that develops all those beautiful flavors. And then you caramelize those sugars at the end. While I'm baking those cookies, while I'm roasting that coffee, I'm thinking about who I'm serving it to. These days with computer technology, I can see the list of who's ordered while I'm roasting. And so maybe it's my friend Callie at Cafe Regina in Puerto Rico, and I know I'm roasting her coffee.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm even thinking about that handoff and ownership while it's in the drum. Maybe it's going to our cafe, and I have no clue who's going to come to our cafe that day. But I'm lucky enough that my roaster is set up with a window into our cafe, and I see people the entire time that I'm roasting coming in, getting their cup of coffee in the morning. Some people just having the smile of, oh my God, I had my coffee. Some people coming, taking a sip of their first specialty coffee and having that look of wonder on their face like, whoa, coffee can taste like this? And so I'm really aware of that handoff while I'm actively roasting before I even get to the handing it over.
I never thought of setting up a roaster through a window from the perspective of a roaster. I've always thought the other way around, like, oh, the customer can see what's going on, but you're talking about it as a way to motivate yourself.
Absolutely.
For handing off that ownership, right?
Absolutely.
It's like,
I can see what's going on. I can see those moments.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I think we're coming to time. I'm sad about it. I have so many more
I'm so
questions.
sad. I'm heartbroken.
I'm about to cry. I'd love to talk about some closing questions, but before we go there, is there anything else you just want to say without being prompted about your role as a roaster in coffee?
Two things I want to say about my role as a roaster is two things about roasting in general. One, roasting is for everybody. I learned off the generosity of everyone around me. Knowledge should be available and free to everybody. Roasting has kind of a dark history of being very siloed and mysterious, which is fun to some degree, where it's like, ooh, what's happening there? There's some alchemy. But that's for everybody. And folks like you are doing amazing work to make sure that that becomes accessible to the entire public.
Oh, thank you.
And that we really need to, as roasters, continue opening those doors and sharing that information. The second thing that's important in roasting, that I think it's so easy to get that technical side, so easy to get caught up in, how's my ROR? What's my drop temp? What's the density? What's the weight loss? Oh, is there moisture activity? Is gratitude.
Okay.
Roast with gratitude.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Which ties back in to that ownership process is, being grateful for those who took ownership and responsibility before you. Grateful for this role. And grateful for those after you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. You said something earlier about curves, and I'm like, any listener who doesn't know what you're like, we're talking about our curves. I was like our dad bod curves. No. I love that. I'm going to enter into some closing questions here for you. Okay.
Can we do a lightning round? We can do a lightning
round. Oh, I'm not that fast. I'm a slow person.
You get fast at answering questions as a roaster because everyone wants to come and talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
In the last 3 minutes of a roast when it's really important to pay attention. So you just snap.
You don't want to crash, right? You're trying not to crash. Yeah.
No crash and burn.
Okay, well, I'll try to ask them quickly. So the first question is, how can our listeners be a part of what you're doing? It doesn't have to be metric stuff, like just you as a person.
Buy coffee, drink it, and think about it when you're drinking it. That's all. Okay. And it could be, honestly, a cup of coffee from McDonald's. Drink some Colombian coffee from McDonald's and think that
and be mindful.
A human grew this, a human picked this, a human shipped it, a human roasted this, a human made this, and now I'm drinking it. Or come to Metric and drink one. And that's cool too. But it's beautiful that there's coffee everywhere. All over the world, you can drink a cup of coffee. And just the best way, if you're listening to a coffee podcast, you probably already care about coffee. But I invite you, and what will support me as a roaster, while you're drinking your next cup of coffee, think about all the sets of hands that went into that cup.
Yeah, I love it. Question 2, if our listeners only take one thing away, so they forget everything that they heard on this episode, and they only remember one thing you said, what would you want that thing to be?
If you only remember one thing about coffee from every episode of this podcast, not even this episode, it's that care makes good coffee.
I love it. I'm going to quote you on that one too.
Please.
Last one. You don't have to answer this one, but it's this idea of unlearning. So is there anything you've unlearned? It can be recently or ever. Is the idea that you held a belief and something challenged and changed your mind and it impacted your life. Can be coffee, non-coffee.
Asking about unlearning, bringing up unlearning, I pause not because, I can't think of anything, but I can't think of a day in the last year where I didn't unlearn something and have my opinion shifted or my perspective shifted.
Wow, yeah.
I think the biggest thing in the last year about coffee that I've unlearned is the focus on top tier quality and how important getting high-end coffee is to the importance of bringing up that bottom mark, setting the buy higher on the bottom end. Okay. It's cool to take an 89-point coffee to a 90-point coffee, but the impact of an 83-point coffee to an 84-point coffee, and shifting as a roaster that focuses on really high-end coffees and has the privilege of working with really high-end coffees, my perspective of not stopping caring about those, but I'm gonna flip that completely on end and think about how do we bring the bottom up rather than how do we raise the top higher.
I love that. Yeah, wonderful perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We're excited to share it with the world, and we'll have to connect again about roasting.
Absolutely, please. Roasting series on the podcast.
Yeah, right on.
Roasting series on the podcast.
Let's get one of these.
Such a pleasure to get to hang with y'all.
A pleasure.
I found so many nuggets from Hara in this episode, so many ways to think about what it means to be a part of a chain of people creating together. And the passion is contagious. What do you think? We only have 2 more episodes left in our series to tell. If you have enjoyed this series so far, please leave us a review wherever you listen, as it helps get the podcast out to more people. Thanks again to Ryan Ingerson for his hard work on the research and gimbling for this episode. As always, and until next time, happy brewing.